I left before sunrise the next morning, not because I was running, but because I wanted the quiet. The world feels softer before it wakes up, as if it hasn't yet decided what to demand from you. I locked the door behind me and stood there for a moment, key in hand, listening to the stillness. That house had been my daughter's safety net for years. Mine too, once. Now it felt like a museum of sacrifices no one visited anymore. I drove without music, letting my thoughts keep me company. With every mile, memories surfaced. Emily at 5, asleep in the back seat after school. Emily at 16, slamming doors. Emily at 30, asking for help without ever asking how I was doing. I didn't hate her. That was the strangest part. I just felt done. By mid-morning, I checked into a small coastal motel 2 towns over. Nothing fancy. Clean, quiet. A place where no one knew my name or my role. I paid in cash, something I hadn't done in years, and carried my bag inside. The room smelled faintly of detergent and ocean air. I sat on the bed and let myself breathe. Then I did the hardest thing of all. I turned my phone off. For the first time since Emily was born, I made myself unreachable. I spent the day walking along the shoreline, shoes in hand, sand cool beneath my feet. I watched families pass by, mothers calling after children, couples arguing softly, grandparents trailing behind. Everyone carrying their own quiet stories. That evening, I sat at the small desk in my room and opened my notebook. I wrote without editing. I wrote about the woman I used to be before I learned to disappear politely. I wrote about the dreams I buried because they didn't fit into school schedules or grocery budgets. I wrote about love that became obligation and how easily the two can blur. Around midnight, I turned my phone back on. 12 missed calls, 7 messages. The last one was from Emily. What did you do? The bank says the account is frozen. I stared at the screen for a long time. I could have replied with explanations, with apologies, with comfort. Instead, I typed, I didn't disappear. I stopped pretending. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then vanished. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling fan as it hummed softly above me. My heart raced, not with fear, but with something closer to grief. Because I knew this wasn't just about money. This was about the moment a child realizes their parent is not an extension of them, but a separate human being with limits. And I knew Emily would not take that realization gently. The next morning would bring anger, accusations, panic dressed up as concern. And when it did, she would finally understand what my birthday decision truly meant. Not punishment, boundaries. And boundaries, I was learning, feel like abandonment to those who were never taught to stand on their own. The anger came right on schedule. It arrived the next morning in the form of long messages, each sharper than the last, stacked one on top of the other like accusations in a courtroom. I read them slowly, carefully, the way you read something important even when it hurts. How could you do this to me? Do you have any idea what position you've put me in? This is selfish, Mom. Completely selfish. I set the phone down and watched the ocean through the thin motel curtains. The waves didn't argue back. They didn't explain themselves. They simply arrived and left, over and over again, steady and unapologetic. For years, I had trained myself to respond immediately, to soothe, to fix, to make sure Emily never sat too long with discomfort. Reading those messages without answering felt unnatural, almost cruel. But then I remembered her words from my birthday. My life would be better without you. I wasn't punishing her. I was giving her exactly what she said she wanted. By noon, the tone of the messages changed. Are you okay? Where are you staying? This isn't funny. Concern, I realized, can sound a lot like fear when control slips away. I decided then that silence would not teach her anything, but honesty might. I called her. She answered immediately. Finally, she said, her voice tight. What are you doing? I'm taking care of myself, I replied. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She exhaled loudly. You froze the account, the house funding, everything. I had plans, Mom. I know, I said. They were built on my exhaustion. That's unfair, she snapped. You offered. Yes, I said gently. And I'm allowed to stop. There it was, the part she didn't know how to argue with. You're acting like a victim, she said. I smiled sadly. No, I'm acting like someone who finally noticed she mattered. She went quiet. You embarrassed me, she said after a moment. I had to explain things. I've been explaining myself for 35 years, I replied. I'm done. She began to cry then, not softly, but angrily. So what? You're just leaving? Pretending you're dead? The word hung between us. No, I said. I'm doing the opposite. I could almost hear her recalculating, adjusting, searching for the version of me she could still manage. When are you coming back? She asked. I don't know, I answered honestly, and for once, that's okay. After we hung up, my hands trembled not from fear, but from the release of something long held tight. That afternoon, I received an email from the bank confirming the final changes. Everything was in my name alone now. Clear, simple, mine. I printed it out and folded it neatly. That night, as the sun slipped into the ocean and painted the sky in soft oranges and blues, I realized something quietly powerful. Emily wasn't destroyed. She was inconvenienced. And there is a world of difference between the two. But the thing I left behind for her, the thing waiting on her table, had not yet been discovered. And when it was, she would finally understand that love without respect is not love at all. I returned home a week later, not because I felt pulled back, but because I was ready. The house greeted me the same way it always had, quietly, patiently, like it had been holding its breath. I walked through each room slowly, noticing details I had long stopped seeing. The framed photos where I stood slightly off to the side. The furniture chosen for durability, not joy. the kitchen calendar still marked with Emily's appointments, her reminders, her life. I sat at the dining table, the same one where she had sat across from me on my birthday, and placed a single envelope in the center. Inside it was a letter, handwritten, unfolded, not dramatic, the kind of letter that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't need to. I wrote about love, about how fiercely I had loved her, about how that love had slowly taught me to disappear. I wrote that helping is not the same as being consumed, that generosity without boundaries becomes resentment, even when no one wants it to. And I wrote one sentence I had rewritten 5 times before it felt honest enough to leave behind. I am not withdrawing my love. I am withdrawing my sacrifice. I placed the envelope carefully where she couldn't miss it. Then I packed the rest of my things. Not everything, just what mattered. Clothes I chose for myself, books I'd never had time to read, a small box of photographs from before motherhood, the woman I used to be, smiling without explanation. When Emily arrived later that afternoon, I wasn't there. She called. I didn't answer. She texted. I didn't reply. She found the letter. I imagine she read it quickly at first, expecting justification, maybe apology. I imagine the moment she realized neither was coming. That instead, she was being asked to sit with something unfamiliar. Accountability. That evening, my phone buzzed once. I read it, she wrote. I didn't know you felt like that. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. That's the problem, I typed. You never asked. There was no immediate reply. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to fill the silence. I settled into a small furnished apartment near the water temporary, but mine. I hung my clothes where I liked. I cooked meals for pleasure, not efficiency. I slept deeply. Days passed. Then another message came. I'm angry, Emily wrote, but I'm also scared. I nodded to myself as I read it. Fear often arrives when entitlement leaves. We can talk, I replied, when you're ready to listen. That night, I stood by the window and watched the lights flicker on across the city. Somewhere behind one of those windows, my daughter was learning something painful and necessary, that love does not mean unlimited access. And for the first time since she was born, I wasn't rushing ahead of her to soften the landing, because some lessons must be walked through alone. And the hardest part of being a mother is knowing when stepping back is the most loving thing you can do. Emily came to see me 2 weeks later. She didn't call first. She never had. But this time, when she knocked on the door of my small apartment, her hand hesitated before making contact. I noticed that through the peephole, the pause of someone who suddenly isn't sure they still belong. When I opened the door, she looked different. Not dramatic, not broken, just unsettled. The confidence she wore so easily had slipped, replaced by something closer to uncertainty. Hi, she said. Hi, I replied, stepping aside. Come in. She glanced around the apartment as if cataloging it. The simple furniture, The open windows, the quiet. It didn't look like abandonment. It looked like peace, and I could see that confused her. You moved fast, she said. I moved intentionally, I corrected gently. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped, eyes restless. For a moment, neither of us spoke. In the past, I would have filled the silence with reassurance. This time, I let it breathe. I didn't think you'd actually do it, she said finally. I thought you were just upset. I was, I said, but I was also awake. She frowned. You always helped. You never complained. I did complain, I said softly. I just did it quietly, to myself. That landed heavier than any accusation could have. She swallowed. I didn't mean what I said on your birthday. I know, I replied. But you meant that you didn't see me anymore, and that part matters. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying responsibility you assumed someone else would always hold for you. I don't know how to do things without you, she admitted. And there it was. Not cruelty, not hatred, dependence. I believe you'll learn, I said, but not if I keep rescuing you. She nodded slowly, absorbing it piece by piece. What happens now? She asked. I smiled, not unkindly. Now we build something new, slowly, with respect. She looked up at me then, really looked perhaps for the first time as an adult looking at another adult. I don't want to lose you, she said. I reached across the small table between us and placed my hand over hers. You won't, I said, but you don't get to consume me either. She squeezed my hand once, just once. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was the beginning of something honest. And honesty, I had learned, is a stronger foundation than sacrifice ever was. As she left that afternoon, I felt no triumph, only quiet certainty. I had not abandoned my daughter. I had finally stopped abandoning myself. And somehow, that made room for both of us to exist in the same story, not as savior and dependent, but as two imperfect women learning where love ends and respect begins. After that day, our relationship didn't magically repair itself. It slowed. And in that slowing, something new began to take shape. Emily started calling instead of assuming. She asked before making plans that involved me. Sometimes she still slipped. Old habits don't vanish overnight. But now, when I said no, she didn't argue. She paused. She adjusted. That alone told me everything I needed to know. One afternoon, she asked if we could walk together. Just walk. We met at a small park near my apartment. The trees were beginning to turn, leaves drifting down without urgency. We walked side by side, not quite touching, the way people do when they're still learning how close they're allowed to be. I didn't realize how much I took from you, she said suddenly. I didn't answer right away. Confessions need space. I thought that because you were strong, you didn't feel it, she continued. I thought needing you meant you were needed. I stopped walking and turned to her. Being needed isn't the same as being valued, I said. She nodded slowly. I see that now. We resumed walking. The air felt lighter after that. She told me about the stress she'd been carrying, the expectations she felt trapped by, the fear of failing without a safety net. For the first time, she didn't speak as a child to a parent, but as a woman trying to understand her own limits. And for the first time, I listened without shrinking myself to make her feel bigger. "I don't want to be like this," she said. "I don't want to hurt you." "I know," I replied, "but wanting isn't enough. Behavior has to change." She accepted that without protest. That night, after she left, I sat alone and thought about all the years I had mistaken endurance for love. How many women my age carried the same quiet exhaustion, convinced it was the price of motherhood. We are taught to give until nothing remains, and then praised for the emptiness. I refused that ending. A week later, Emily sent me a message. "I handled something on my own today," it read. "I wanted to tell you." I smiled when I read it, not because she still sought approval, but because she wanted acknowledgement, not rescue. Progress isn't loud. It's subtle, uncomfortable, earned. And while I knew our relationship would always carry scars, I also knew this version of us was healthier than the one built on unspoken resentment. Love that survives boundaries is love that can breathe. And as I prepared dinner that evening, choosing what I wanted to eat, moving at my own pace, I felt something settle into place. Peace, not the fragile peace that depends on compliance, but the solid kind that comes from self-respect. And I realized then that my birthday gift to myself hadn't been escape or revenge. It had been permission to exist fully. And that, I was certain, was something worth celebrating. With time, the sharp edges softened, not because we ignored them, but because we stopped pressing against them. Emily began rebuilding her life without the invisible cushion I had always provided. She downsized, adjusted, learned to sit with inconvenience instead of calling it crisis. I watched from a respectful distance, resisting the urge to step in every time things looked uncomfortable. Growth, I learned, often looks like struggle from the outside. One afternoon, she invited me to lunch, her treat. A small thing, but it carried weight. We sat across from each other at a quiet cafe, sunlight warming the table between us. "I never realized how much you gave up," she said, stirring her coffee. "I thought that's just what mothers do." I nodded. "That's what we're taught." She looked at me then, eyes clear. "I don't want to repeat that pattern." Something in my chest loosened at her words. That was never my goal, to punish, to teach a lesson, to prove a point. It had always been about stopping a cycle before it hardened into legacy. After lunch, I walked home slowly, thinking about the woman I had been at Emily's age, afraid of being selfish, terrified of being alone, willing to disappear if it meant keeping the peace. I wished I could go back and take her by the shoulders. "You're allowed to take up space," I would tell her. Love doesn't require self-erasure. But maybe this, helping my daughter learn it sooner, was enough. That evening, I took out the old photo of myself at 25 and placed it on my bedside table, not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but of what had always been there, waiting. I was still her, still capable, still worthy, still alive. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't planning my life around someone else's needs. I enrolled in a local art class. Nothing serious, just color and canvas and quiet. My hands shook the first day, not from age, but from the thrill of doing something simply because I wanted to. When I told Emily, she smiled. "That sounds like you," she said. It felt like a victory, not over her, but over the version of myself that believed love required sacrifice without limit. As weeks turned into months, our conversations grew easier, lighter. We spoke honestly, without fear of collapse. When disagreements arose, we didn't rush to fix them. We let them exist. That was new, and it was healthy. I don't know what the future holds. Relationships evolve. People stumble. But I know this: I will never again measure my worth by how much I give away. Love can be generous without being destructive. Family can be close without being consuming. And mothers, especially older ones, are allowed to begin again. The day I stopped sacrificing myself didn't end my role as a mother. It finally allowed me to be a whole person alongside my child. And that, I believe, is how love grows strong instead of silent. Now, when I think back to that birthday, I no longer feel the sting first. I feel the turning. Life has a way of offering us moments that look cruel on the surface, but are actually invitations, quiet ones, to finally choose ourselves. At the time, my daughter's words felt like a door slamming shut. In truth, they were a door opening that I had been afraid to touch for years. Emily and I are still mother and daughter. That never disappeared, but we are no longer bound by silent contracts or unspoken debts. We meet each other now as two adults who love each other imperfectly, honestly, and with limits. Some days are easier than others. There are moments when she slips back into old habits, and moments when I feel the old pull to fix everything for her. But now, when that happens, I pause. I breathe. And I remind myself that love doesn't demand I disappear. A few weeks ago, she called me on my birthday again, this time with a cake she bought herself. We laughed about how terrible it looked and how much better it tasted than the one from last year. Before she left, she hugged me and said something simple. "I'm glad you stayed." She didn't mean stayed in the house. She meant stayed alive to myself. After she left, I sat alone with the candle still flickering, and I realized something I wish every woman my age could hear. There are words that don't fade with time. They settle into you quietly and change how you breathe. I was standing in my kitchen on my birthday when my daughter said them. No raised voice, no dramatic pause, just a sentence delivered the way one might comment on the weather. "Mom, my life would be better without you." For a moment, I thought I'd misunderstood. At my age, Hearing plays tricks on you sometimes. I waited for the laugh, the correction, the "I didn't mean it like that." None came. The cake sat between us on the small table by the window. Chocolate, her favorite. I had baked it myself that morning, even though my hands ached and my knees protested every step. Old habits die hard. Mothers show love by doing, even when doing hurts. I smiled at her then, not because I felt okay, but because smiling had been my armor for decades. "Well," I said softly, "that's honest." She looked relieved. That hurt more than the words. My daughter Emily had always been strong-willed. Even as a child, she knew what she wanted and expected the world to arrange itself accordingly. I told myself that was confidence. I told myself a lot of things over the years. I raised her alone after her father passed. I worked longer hours than my body wanted. I put my own dreams on shelves so high I eventually forgot they were mine. Every decision I made had her name written on it somewhere. And somewhere along the way, sacrifice stopped being love and became expectation. She sat across from me that day, scrolling through her phone, already done with the conversation. The words had been said. The burden me had been acknowledged. "I just think," she added, not looking up, "you rely on me too much." I thought of the house, the bills, the savings I'd quietly transferred to help with her down payment last year, the monthly contributions I never mentioned because mothers aren't supposed to keep score. "I see," I said. She finally looked at me then. "Don't make this dramatic. It's my birthday week. I just want peace." My birthday. I nodded again, smiled again, played my role perfectly. That night, after she left, I sat alone at the table long after the candles burned down to waxy stubs. I didn't cry. Tears come later, when the body feels safe enough to release them. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Clarity. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided my entire life. What would happen if I stopped giving everything away? The answer frightened me, and then, strangely, it calmed me. Because for the first time in years, the choice before me wasn't about being a good mother. It was about being a whole person. I stood up, cleared the plates, and walked to my bedroom. I opened the drawer where I kept documents I rarely touched, the ones labeled just in case. And as I sat on the edge of my bed, holding papers that represented decades of quiet sacrifice, I realized something that made my hands tremble. Emily thought I was already gone. So what I decided to do next was simply stop pretending that disappearing was the same as dying. The morning after my birthday, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. Sunlight crept through the curtains and landed on the dining table where the cake still sat, untouched except for the missing slice I'd cut for appearances. I stared at it for a long time before finally throwing it away. It felt symbolic, though I couldn't have said why just yet. I made coffee and carried it to the living room. Sitting in the armchair where I'd spent so many evenings worrying about things that never truly belonged to me. My daughter's voice from the night before replayed itself without effort, not angrily, not cruelly, casually. That was the part that stayed with me. I had been a single mother for most of Emily's life. I learned early how to be quiet about my needs. When money was tight, I skipped meals. When I was tired, I told myself other people had it worse. When my health began to falter, I joked about it so she wouldn't feel burdened. Somewhere along the way, I taught her that my presence was optional. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out a small metal box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were folders neatly labeled mortgage papers, insurance policies, savings accounts, the practical proof of a life spent planning for everyone else. I had always told myself I was being responsible. But responsibility, I was beginning to understand, can quietly turn into erasure. I sat at the table again and did something radical for a woman my age. I read everything, every line, every clause, every assumption I had made about what my future was supposed to look like. By noon, I had made a list, not dramatic, not angry, just clear. I would stop funding the things that kept me small. I would stop paying for silence disguised as peace. I would stop apologizing for still being alive. The first call I made was to the bank. My voice shook only a little as I asked questions I'd never dared to ask before. About access, about transfers, about what was mine, not what I had promised out of habit or guilt. The woman on the other end was kind, professional, unimpressed by emotion, and somehow that helped. When I hung up, my hands were steady. The second call was harder. Emily answered on the third ring. "Hey," she said distractedly. "I'm busy." "I won't take long," I replied. She sighed. "What is it, Mom?" "I need to make some changes," I said. "Financial ones." There was a pause, then a laugh. "You're not cutting me off, are you? Don't be dramatic." I looked out the window at the quiet street, at a world that had gone on turning while I stayed frozen in place. "I'm not cutting you off," I said calmly. "I'm stepping back." "From what?" she asked sharply. "From being everything," I said. Her tone changed then. "You can't just decide things like that." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "I already have." After we hung up, I felt something crack open inside me. Not relief, not joy, possibility. I packed a small bag that afternoon, just a few clothes, a notebook, the photograph of myself at 25, before motherhood became my entire identity. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but for the first time, I knew exactly why I was leaving, and I hadn't yet told my daughter the part that would truly change everything. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this, and if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.